Florence, birthplace of the Renaissance. In central Italy, the proud towers, domes, and spires of the city of Florence rise above the waters of the Arno River. Within the city, 8 bridges span this storied river. The Ponte Vecchio is perhaps the most colorful bridge in Europe. The spacious squares, or piazzas, of Florence, with their harmonious stone buildings and their sculptures of marble or bronze, become outdoor museums to be enjoyed by native Florentines and tourists alike. Around the city rise the foothills of the Apennine Mountains, mantled in green and dotted with picturesque villas and farmhouses. Tradition says that Florence was founded in a field of flowers. The city's emblem is a lily, or iris, and the name Florence, or Firenze in Italian, means the flowering. During the 14th century, a movement began in this small city in the heart of Tuscany that was to change the world. The movement is known as the Renaissance, indicating the rebirth of the Western classical heritage. Here, medieval dogmas were replaced with a zeal for recovering the classics of ancient Greece and Rome, and for building upon them a brilliant new culture which would transform all of Europe. In order to understand why the people of this particular city possessed the insight, courage, and wealth to spark the Renaissance, it is necessary to look far back into its past. Thousands of years ago, an Etruscan settlement developed in the hills of Fiesole, above the meandering Arno River in central Italy. It could be reached only by way of mountain roads, for the settlement's hills formed the last promontory of the Apennine Mountains. Passage from north to south was barred by the Arno River and its treacherous marshes. It was possible to cross the river only at the point where the waters narrow, where the Ponte Vecchio stands today. It was at this site that Florence had its origin in about 200 BC, first as an outpost of the Etruscans and later as a Roman colony. Under the Romans in the 1st century BC, it became known as Florentia and developed rapidly as an agricultural and commercial center. The hub of the city, or forum, was where the Piazza della Repubblica now stands. Due to the Roman policy of intermarriage between colonists and native women, Florence benefited from the creative legacy of the Etruscan women and the organizing genius of the Roman men. After the fall of Rome in 410 AD, the feudal system began to take shape as a defense against the disintegration of the old Roman social and economic order. The once excellent Roman roads decayed from neglect. Travel became hazardous, and trade was limited to neighboring communities. Society, composed mostly of peasants, warriors, and priests, drew its strength from individual feudal lords rather than from nations, and was held together by the organization of the church. It was through the stability of the church that civilization and culture were preserved. During periods of invasion, people flocked to their bishops for protection. In the monasteries, monks taught the working of wool, which became a source of wealth that enabled Florence to become glorious. In contrast with the majority of medieval towns perched on the top of Italy's steep hills, Florence was in the unprotected valley of the Arno. However, this position was commercially advantageous, as the river powered the mills, supplied fish, and provided water for washing and dyeing the cloth, which became the basis of Florentine economy. Workers in various trades organized themselves into guilds, which became powerful and wielded enormous political influence. One of the 7 major guilds was that of the wool workers, who chose as their emblem the Lamb of God. Their headquarters was in the Arte de la Lana building. Other major guilds were composed of silk weavers, bankers, notaries, and druggists, each of which boasted its own banner. Shopkeepers, innkeepers, shoemakers, carpenters, blacksmiths, grocers, and bakers formed the lesser guilds. The city grew rapidly due to the rise in trade. Gradually, Florence began to emerge as a self-governing town, or free commune. In the 13th century, the government of the city was controlled by consuls, assisted by 2 city councils, which were chosen from upper-class families who belonged to the Society of Towers. Bitter jealousies and feuds developed between these rival families, often causing bloody brawls in the streets. These tumultuous times were also marked by battles of conquest between cities which fought each other to win control of trade routes or to destroy commercial rivals. 2 of Florence's most powerful rivals were Pisa, which fought Florence for rule of the sea, and Lucca, a city which claimed rule over the mountains. Mercenaries, known as condottieri, sold their services to the highest bidder and played a vital part in Italy's wars. For generations, Italians were divided between 2 opposing political factions, the Guelphs, who were supporters of the papacy, and the Ghibellines, who were partisans of the Germanic emperor. The Guelphs announced their affiliation with the Pope by constructing squared battlements on their buildings. Ghibelline support of the emperor was indicated by battlements with fishtail designs. Florentines mastered the art of carrying on business as usual while warring with their neighbors. Inside the narrow circle of walls, aristocrats' houses grew up very high and formed towers, in part due to the lack of space, and partly because in this warring age, each tower house became a fortress when necessary. In order to gain some concept of what Tuscan cities like Florence looked like in the early 13th century, a trip to San Gimignano is necessary. 14 tall towers of the nobility still rise from the rooftops. In Florence, only gates and parts of the set of mighty walls erected in the latter part of the 13th century still stand. The walls surrounded the suburbs, incorporating them into the city and serving as lines of communication. Life in Florence was a public affair. Since their houses were small and dark, shopkeepers thrust their shops out into the streets, where they could be in the midst of the action and could hear the gossip. Merchants were also bankers. By the beginning of the 13th century, the city had become the acknowledged banking center of the Western world, with kings looking to Florentine bankers for loans. Trade flourished, and Florentine cloth was sold throughout the continent. The mighty engine of Florence's financial power was the gold florin, first coined in 1252. With the resulting prosperity came the desire to embellish the city. The Florentines began by remodeling the baptistry, which was the city cathedral, until the completion of the Duomo. The use of colorful marble strips for decorations was a forerunner of what came to be known as the Florentine style. The 13th and 14th centuries were marked by an incredible building boom. The cathedral, Santa Maria del Fiore, was started in 1296 by decree of the Republic of Florence. This undertaking was the greatest expression of faith, power, and civic pride in all medieval Italy. The imposing palace of the Priors, or Palazzo Vecchio, was built to house the honored executive officials of the proud Republican period. In view of the first circle of walls, two convents, Franciscan and Dominican, were established. The facades of their popular churches looked toward the nest of malice, the wicked heart of the city. Of the arts. Florentine author Dante Alighieri helped establish the local vernacular as the spoken and literary language of all Italy. He is known especially for his philosophic political poem, The Divine Comedy, in which he recounts his imaginary journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise. But Dante's world was still that of the Middle Ages. The origin of Renaissance thought can be traced to the writings of Petrarch in the 1330s. He questioned traditional beliefs and practices and believed in studying languages, literature, history, and philosophy rather than concentrating so much on studying the scriptures. Around 1340, the Black Death ravaged Europe. Fully one-half the population of Florence perished. Boccaccio in his Decameron wrote, "The calamity had installed such terror in the hearts of men and women that brother abandoned brother. Thousands fell ill daily and died without help of any kind." The Black Death riveted the attention of men on the world around them. They did not cease to believe in God and heaven, but they did begin to believe that the physical world was their destiny, and that truth lay in nature and the material world, not with eternity. In spite of wars, political upheavals, and plagues, Florence began to develop leadership in the field of culture as well as trade. Education was not confined to the wealthy, but was almost universal. Scholars gathered for long discussions and to exchange ideas. Latin literature and Greek ideals became the basis of an elaborate program of classical education. Villas sprang up in the Tuscan hills beyond the walls. Here, wealthy Florentines could escape the summer heat and annoyances of the city and indulge in philosophic discussions. Within the city, their enormous palaces were replete with internal columned courtyards and contained fabulous collections of art. The early Renaissance Florentines were individualists with a strong thirst for knowledge. They were independent, with a superb business sense and a love of beauty. They believed in civic patronage, returning to the city some of the fortune it had made possible for them. To thank God for his blessings, they embellished churches and monasteries as well. These generous gifts also reflected the individual's own glory and wealth. Although palaces and civic buildings began to claim as much attention as religious structures, merchants and bankers continued to commission frescoes for their family chapels in the churches. A new development was the inclusion of citizens dressed in the costume of the day as spectators in the religious scenes. Sometimes the likeness of the patron was painted as a kneeling figure beside the altar. Outwardly, life was festive. Jousts, weddings, pageants, and festivals not only furnished entertainment, but kept artists busy. They decorated banners, painted marriage chests, fashioned jewelry and costumes, and designed scenery, all to the delight of the people. Music was an integral part of life. Those who could afford them kept musicians on their staffs to play at banquets, balls, and other festive occasions. Art was very much a matter of public and official concern. Art criticism came from the masses. Competitions were held for such projects as the bronze doors of the baptistry and the dome to be erected for the cathedral. A multitude of civic and religious works were carried on at the expense of the people, who contributed with free offerings, legacies, and taxes. The painter Giotto designed the famous bell tower called the Campanile. It is a reminder of the versatility of the artists of Florence, who were usually skilled in two or more crafts, such as sculpture, architecture, painting, or jewelry making. Beginning between 6 and 12 years of age, artists acquired their training through the apprentice system. Apprentices transferred the master's preliminary drawings to a panel or wall, ground colors, and prepared gold, among other tasks. Early in the 15th century, Brunelleschi and his friend Donatello, in search of inspiration, went to Rome, where they haunted the ruins and drew ground plans, vaults, and cornices. They introduced classical motifs to their work, further stimulating Renaissance Florence in the fields of art and architecture. Brunelleschi's design for the dome of the cathedral was perhaps the first distinctive note of the new order. It purposely emphasizes the exterior to dominate not only the cathedral, but the whole city. Inspired by classic remains, Donatello returned to nature in art. In his St. George, the first freestanding sculpture since antiquity, Donatello gives the impression of a living body beneath the closely fitting armor. Donatello's revolutionary ideas, tending strongly toward realism, were of tremendous influence on both painters and sculptors of the 15th century. Leone Battista Alberti, the humanist architect, did much to formulate Renaissance art theory through his writings. The elegant facade of Santa Maria Novella is an example of his skill in architectural design. Luca della Robbia is best known for his introduction of another technical method in the field of sculpture, that of glazed terracotta. His backgrounds are usually a deep blue, his figures creamy white with tender, gentle expressions. The first early Renaissance painter was Giotto. A pupil of Cimabue, he lived until 1337. He started the movement toward natural appearance in his individual figures, which was to dominate the Florentine school. Followers imitated him, but there was no further development for nearly 100 years until the appearance of Masaccio, whose very realistic figures were placed in backgrounds of great depth and vividness. His innovations made such an impression that the frescoes of the Branacci Chapel in Santa Maria del Carmine became the model for the school of the Florentines. Fra Angelico continued the medieval tradition, but line, pattern, and color are predominant, and individual character is evident in many of the faces. He introduced a range of colors that any Florentine cloth merchant could appreciate. Paolo Uccello was particularly intrigued with perspective in art. He drew plans of buildings and figures receding according to scientific principles. These realists of the 15th century worked out the fundamental principles of their craft, laying the groundwork for the later accomplishments of the high Renaissance artists. Leonardo da Vinci has become the symbol of the investigating, searching character of the period. He was the most versatile genius of the Renaissance. Not only outstandingly creative in painting, sculpture, and architecture, he was also an imaginative inventor, a designer of artillery, a hydraulic engineer, and a forerunner in the field of flight. Obsessed with the human figure, Michelangelo Buonarroti is considered the supreme sculptor of the Renaissance. He is noted for his huge statues, which he fused with an emotional force unequal to this day. Raphael is best known for his appealing Madonnas. He offers the warmest, most human feeling of the times. For arts to develop fully, there must be substantial wealth and patronage, wisely distributed. The most famous of the many Florentine patrons were the Medicis, who were friends and intimates of the great sculptors, architects, and painters. Red poly, or roundels of the Medici arms, still exist as a reminder of the 3 centuries of their political dominance over Florence. They are seen throughout Florence and Tuscany. Through marriage, they were affiliated with many of the ruling houses of Europe, and they contributed 2 queens of France, Catherine and Marie de' Medici, and 2 popes, Leo X and Clement VII. Although the Medicis were ruthless politicians, they utilized their wealth wisely. Their city became the jewel of Europe, and their name is synonymous with the golden age of the Italian Renaissance. The Ospedale degli Innocenti, or Foundling Hospital, the first institution of its kind in Europe, was one of the gifts of Giovanni de' Medici, who founded the wealth and power of the family. He believed that the honor of the city called for donations to public building programs. His son, Cosimo the Elder, became the political and cultural leader of his generation. The arts thrived under his patronage. In the early years of his power, Cosimo helped get the General Council of the Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches transferred to Florence. This brought new ideas and prestige to the city. Under his guidance, Florence became the refuge of Greek scholars following the fall of Constantinople to the Turks in 1453. This gave added impetus to the humanistic movement. He also sponsored a Latin translation of Plato's works and founded the Platonic Academy. With the countless ancient manuscripts he assembled, Cosimo established a library open to the public, and the Medici art collection that he began later became the wonder of the Renaissance world. He paid out large sums for the building, restoration, and embellishment of churches and monasteries, saying, "Never shall I be able to give God enough to set him down in my books as a debtor." He commissioned Michelozzo to rebuild the monastery of San Marco and Fra Angelico to decorate the walls with his delicate frescoes. A large monastic cell to which he could retreat for quiet reflection was always at his disposal. He also commissioned Michelozzo to build a palace worthy of his family's high social standing, yet not pretentious enough to arouse the envy of others. The result was a superb building of pure Renaissance character, known today as the Medici Riccardi Palace. Although there were those whom Cosimo had wronged in his struggle for power and wealth, the Florentines as a whole were grateful for all he had done for them in their city. They sincerely mourned his passing. A public decree was passed conferring on him the title Pater Patriae, or Father of his Country. In 1464, Cosimo was succeeded by his son, Piero il Gottoso, the Gouty, who despite ill health and initial errors, governed with wisdom for 5 years until his death. With Lorenzo the Magnificent, Cosimo's grandson, the prestige of the Medici name reached its highest point. He surrounded himself with the most brilliant scholars of the age. He himself was a talented poet and author. The people of Florence delighted in singing and quoting his lyrics, odes, and sonnets. Lorenzo brought beauty and dignity to the public festivals enjoyed by the masses, thus endearing himself even more to the people. Lorenzo the Magnificent, Bacchic lord and art patron, made great contributions through his diplomacy and established peace in his later years. He died in his country villa at Careggi in 1492, mourned by all of Europe. With his death, the golden age of Florence drew to an end. Without resistance, his son Piero turned over fortresses which were keys to the defense of Florence to the invading king, Charles VIII of France. In reaction to Medici tyranny and decadence, the Dominican monk Savonarola drove Piero from power in 1494 and was instrumental in establishing a republic of a strongly religious character. He practically became a dictator, and pleasure-loving Florence became a city of Puritans. But powerful enemies banded against him. In 1498, he was arrested, tried for heresy, condemned, hanged, and then burned in the Piazza della Signoria. After the execution of Savonarola, Florence failed to regain the vitality and gaiety of its golden age. Various disasters brought gloom to the city. It was during this period that Machiavelli wrote his book, The Prince, which contains his theory of government by deceit. His tomb is in the church of Santa Croce. The Medicis were again restored to power at about the same time that Giovanni de' Medici, another son of Lorenzo, became Pope Leo X. In order to raise money for completion of St. Peter's Basilica, he appointed a staff of indulgence sellers to spread out through Europe. The outrage this caused lit the fuse that became the Reformation. The brave Florentines withstood siege by German, Spanish, and Italian mercenary troops from the end of the summer of 1529 until August 1530, when they were forced to capitulate. Any semblance of republican government was lost when Charles V appointed the last of the senior line, Alessandro de' Medici, hereditary duke. After his assassination, the Florentines chose as ruler a member of a collateral branch of the Medici family, and the Pope bestowed upon him the title of Grand Duke of Tuscany. He called himself Cosimo I in order to distinguish himself from Cosimo the Elder. Grand Duke Cosimo unified most of Tuscany and restored the reputation of Florence as a cultural center. The Grand Ducal Court gathered at the Pitti Palace, which he and his Spanish wife, Eleanor of Toledo, had secured and enlarged as a residence more befitting their station in life. Today, the olive trees of Tuscany are a constant reminder of his legacy, for he introduced them to the area in order to increase the wealth of the peasantry. His descendants were mediocre rulers, yet they continued to foster the arts and sciences. Ferdinand I had a portion of the Uffizi, which his father had built for his administrative offices, converted into museum space for displaying the Medici treasures. Ferdinand's son, Cosimo II, helped Galileo carry out his scientific investigations. Cosimo appointed the astronomer court philosopher and gave him a villa at Acerti. Here Galileo made his important improvements to the telescope, which enabled him to be the first person to see the mountains of the Moon and the satellites of Jupiter. When the Medici line failed to produce an heir, the government passed to the line of Lorraine. The new rulers were more interested in rural traditions and agriculture than art. The last of the Medici, Anna Maria Luisa, bequeathed the vast Medici art collection to the city of Florence in 1743 for the utility of the public and to attract the curiosity of foreigners. These treasures are housed in the Uffizi and in the Pitti Palace. In 1805, Tuscany became part of Napoleon's French Empire. The mid-19th century was marked with efforts to free Italy from foreign rule and to unite the provinces. Garibaldi, victorious military leader, and Victor Emmanuel, king of the new united Italy, are seen shaking hands in this memorial in nearby Fiesole. Freed at last from foreign rule, Florence served as capital of the Italian kingdom from 1865 until after Rome was liberated in 1870. The officials took up residence in the finest palaces and disfigured great portions of the city with alterations and the raising of important buildings. During World War II, Allied bombings and German demolition teams also did great damage to the city. Art treasures suffered near ruin in the floods of 1966. But in spite of its many disasters, Florence remains a leading center of art and culture. An atmosphere of